What's up, everybody? It's Johnny King with another episode of the Johnny King Show. I'm stoked to have the man, the legend, Philip Folsom back in the house. Not back in the house for the first time. How are you, man?
So good.
So good. He's the CEO of Wolf Tribe, and I'm just excited to get into all the things he's been in. You've been in men's work for quite a while, yes?
Yeah, not 30 years, young Jedi.
Exactly. Which is, I just, when we chatted before offline, well, before the recording, I just felt like, I don't know, you have that mentor type energy, the king energy, where you've lived enough life where you've got great wisdom, and yet you are not even remotely close to being done, So I'm excited to kind of tap into some of that.
Yeah, I have gravitas about me now.
Gravitas, yes.
Which is a nice way of saying you're old.
Yeah, exactly.
You have such command bearing. It's like, yeah, you're old.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm getting there.
They say that men in their 50s, wisdom blossoms and strength endures. So
I love that.
For all y'all young men,
yeah.
And my guess is that if you're watching Johnny King, you're probably, what's your
30s
range?
And 40s. Yeah, 30s and 40s. Yeah, some men in the 50s, sure.
Yeah, but 50s is sweet, man. I mean, the joints are kind of a bummer. That starts to happen. But in terms of just emotional regulation, getting a handle on, trauma, discipline, and service, like that, it seems to have solved a lot of the big issues. So I get to just play offense now instead of dealing with the self-sabotage shit of, when I was in my 30s. So
I love it. Well, lots to get into. Let's jump into it. I'm excited. Now, you also served in an elite unit of the United States Army, correct?
Yeah, I was in the very first reconnaissance program, armor acquisition program that was using drones, and I was partnering with Lockheed Martin in the 80s about that whole. Yeah,
that's when they started it, back in the 80s. Drones.
It was very hush hush. Nobody knew.
Yeah.
So we all had secret security clearances, and you couldn't talk about it. And now it's wide open. But we were definitely doing all that Gulf War testing in the mid 80s. That's where we were all prepping for that. So they know what's happening next.
Yeah.
And I actually have a lot of friends who are pretty high up in different branches, and it's kind of frightening to hear what they're talking about. It's like, oh, really?
Yeah.
So. The stuff that we were dealing with in terms of GPS and a whole bunch of stuff in the 80s didn't hit the civilian world until 10 years later, which means that whatever we're using right now on any of the technology platforms, there's way more. Just know that.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder too, as the technology increases kind of on an exponential level, what's all going on behind the scenes. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's a fun time, but also it can be a overwhelming, kind of scary time to be involved. And I think that's one thing I wanted to chat with you about, just because so many men, especially through just me starting to get into men's work myself, pandemic, a lot of men seem like they're lost. They're in a lot of pain. They're alone. I know you talked a lot about just kind of the isolation, the lone wolf syndrome. Tell the guys, those that are listening, a little bit more just of your background, because I don't want to necessarily read the formal bio, but if you don't mind, tell a little bit more about your background. Yeah.
Sure. And this is also kind of a segue and some educational stuff about the work that I do as an anthropologist and as a culture leadership development person. We are designed as young men, and I'm going to assume your loyal listener are men, although I'm sure you have a lot of women who want to, like, what's going on with these men and where do I find one that's functional? Right. So how we're designed to operate is we're domesticated by our mothers. And they're the ones who keep us safe so we don't leap out of trees, which we would do, or, throw shit at each other in the supermarket, which we would do. Yeah. So our mothers domesticate us and they keep us safe. And that's awesome. But at some point, that container is limiting.
Mm.
And at that point, we need to go from our mother's house to our father's house, which is a rite of passage or an initiation. And it requires the death of an old operating system and the rebirth of a new one. And there's a very well researched process to that has happened in every single culture across every time period, except for ours.
Mm.
So we're all a bunch of adolescent males pretending to be men and terrified of being found out as inadequate or as imposters. And there are many men who inherently kind of feel, particularly if you're raised by a single mom like I was, or an absent father, or whatever your scenario was, then you know there's something you have to go do to transition to your father's house. And a lot of times it involves whatever you have available, which is why we see things called shadow initiations, which are, gangs or drinking buddies or sports friends, or in my case, it was the military. That was my intentional transition into my father's house. And it wasn't a complete initiation because there are some components that are not installed, because psychology is an operating system.
Right.
And every time we go through some big event that upgrades our operating system, which requires the death of the old one. And so that was my first transition into the journey that I'm on. And eventually there was an awareness of I had some core wounds, which were about inadequacy and addictions and all of the downstream symptoms of all of that. And I thought that I was the only one. I thought, oh, I'm broken. I hope I don't get found out. And so let me just keep putting this facade up, and cut and run. And then at some point I realized that we all are that. Yeah. Every man I know is crippled by that. And so my big question was, why? Because we're not designed for that. We're not a broken species. And so what's the story behind all that, which led me into this, multi-decade spiral of excavating ancient and elder wisdom in different cultures and whatever hacks I can do to discover how to make people happy and healthy and high performing.
I love that. You mentioned something I wanted to ask you about. How would you describe you described it, but what's the purpose of a shadow gang?
It's a shadow initiation, which means
if people don't know about shadow work or the shadow, explain a little bit.
Shadow is a kind of a tricky catch-all word in psychology or men's work, or honestly, mythology, because mythology is not literal. The moment you start taking mythology as literal, then you've created a religion. I'm just stirring some shit up for your listeners right now. So mythology is not literal and it's not linear, and it deals with metaphor. And so there is some universal metaphors throughout all of our mythology. And some of those are gold. Like why? What is it about gold? It's a useless metal. It's too soft to make tools or weapons out of. So what is it about gold? But it's universally revered across every culture and time span. And it represents value. It connects to the sun. There's a whole bunch of things that are reacted to by humans. Shadow is the opposite. So gold and shadow. And what's interesting is that gold is mined in shadow. And Campbell says that the cave you fear to enter contains the treasure you seek. So shadow is generally recognized as the unknown. It's the chaos or the dark place that people have to go to. It's not necessarily bad. And when we judge it as being bad, then it becomes damaging and toxic and filled with despair and depression. If we look at it as being simply the unknown, filled with magic, transformation, and chaos, then all of a sudden it's no longer a negative thing. It's an uncomfortable transformational piece. And you initially asked like the current technological wave of change is either exciting or scary. So what's the difference between exciting and scary?
I would say maybe your purpose behind it. I'm not sure.
So what are the effects of those different interpretations? Because let's assume that excitement and fear are the same thing as we experiencing them.
Right.
So how we interpret them creates a tremendous downstream differentiation. Right?
But a very similar energy, yeah.
Initially. Yeah. And from a just simple biochemical platform, if I'm interpreting this podcast as being scary and vulnerable and overwhelming, and I'm going to be found out and whatever, then what's happening with my amygdala, which is the smoke alarm in the center of our reptile brain, goes off, and it says, you're being threatened right now. You're going to be embarrassed. People are going to watch this. You're going to be revealed as a fraud. So all of a sudden, my amygdala says, hey, this is red alert. We got to fight and flight. So let me pump you up with cortisol, norepinephrine, adrenaline, and we're going to kick on that sympathetic nervous system so you can beat this dude and you will not be overwhelmed. Right? Now, all of a sudden, I've got all these stress hormones. My sympathetic nervous system's going off. And what that does is it turns off my executive function. It turns off my compassion, it turns off my immune system and my libido and my digestion. And so all of a sudden my life is shitty, as opposed to, ooh, I get to share this hour with Johnny King. Now all of a sudden my amygdala's like, cool, man, let me give you some serotonin, some dopamine, some oxytocin. Now all of a sudden I'm having this sense of inherent well-being and excitement, and I'm sharing, I'm in flow state. It's the same podcast, but my interpretation of the podcast is very, very radically different. And that's shadow. I love it. Carl Jung says, if you're any tree whose branches reach to heaven, its roots reach to hell. That's the dynamic. And it is the most clean, non-judgmental version of shadow. It's like, hey, man, go in there. That's where your roots go. So it powers your branches.
Awesome. And a lot of this you took from your understanding of ancient cultures and kind of applying them to just your modern day experiences and opportunities, I guess.
Sure. There's a vast amount of ancient wisdom in all of our mythology. It's the oldest operating system that we have recorded.
Yeah.
And it's basically the roadmap of how to live life. Thrown up from the depths of our species. It includes all of these big key things. And there's very little difference between cultures. They all contain dragons, heroes, gold, shadow, threshold guardians. It's the same thing. So we can try to invent a new reality, a new society, but the reality is it's not proving to work. It's not working. If you take a look at just the measurables of our current culture with our just skyrocketing depression, anxiety, and suicide, addiction, it's not working.
Right. With all the work that you've been doing with men over the decades, are you finding, I imagine this is kind of a leading question, I imagine you're finding patterns of success and patterns of failure, and what are you seeing that men are consistently struggling with in their life over the years that you've been doing this?
Well, success leaves clues is kind of one of the interesting things. And I don't believe that, there's a thing called the great man, or the era or the idea of the great man.
Yeah.
And there certainly has been periods of history that have thrown up an unusual amount of great men. One of them was kind of the golden era, what they refer to in the timetables of history, where we see in Greece all of Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, like all of the great thinkers in Greece, were happening at the same time that Old Testament prophets were dropping their wisdom, which was happening at the exact same time that all of Confucius and all of the Eastern wisdom sources were happening. So something was going on at that sweet spot in human history. And then it happened again with 300 years ago, when you see all this enlightenment, you see all the founding fathers of the United States, you see all these remarkable things happening where people had their needs met enough that they were able to take some shots at not just surviving, but thriving, becoming aspirational and shooting for a return to virtue. You don't get to talk about virtue when you're defending your house,
right,
or you're starving to death, or you're ravaged by plague.
yeah,
Then you're not talking about virtue. It's
right.
a luxury. Now, I believe we're entering that phase. I think we're entering a new era of great men. And I'm watching it with, and we both know Traver. There's a bunch of men who are young guns who have integrated the information that my generation scrambled for. It was hard to figure out meditation when I was a young man. Like, you had to basically go to India.
Yeah.
You're not even going to the library to get a book. You're going to India if you're going to learn to meditate.
Right.
And so now, you just have to open your little Insight Timer app.
Yeah. Right.
And you get teachers coming into your phone going, let me teach you how to meditate. Like, wow. So we're entering a really exciting era. And I think there's some great men on the horizon. And I can't wait for these leaders to step up and start returning to Gondor. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like Lord of the Rings, the Aragorn out as a ranger having adventures. Fuck that. We need you back. We need you back here. Like, come back from your retreats and all of your ice baths and shadow work and healing shit. Come on back and lead. And that's what's going to make the difference. Is that right now there's a lot of self-interest going on with men. And at some point that has got to come home again.
Yep.
When the Grail needs to be brought back to Gondor.
Yep.
Camelot, or whatever the analogy you want to use.
Yeah. Yeah. So is that touching upon the patterns that you're seeing of where men are struggling? Is it that that focus on one's interests? Is it the low self-esteem? Is it the wounding of past generations that's being passed? What are you seeing?
Have you read Iron John?
No, I haven't, but I'm meaning to. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if I had like a little doctor prescription sheet, I would prescribe every man watching and every woman watching who loves men or has a man. You get Iron John, a book about men by Robert Bly.
Okay, I'm writing it down now. Okay.
So it is Robert Bly's explication, which is a fancy word of saying unpacking or giving information of an ancient initiation ritual of a prince who has to become a man. And it's one of the most comprehensive psychological master classes that I've ever read. And so, in a nutshell, once the prince goes off with the wild man, Iron John, into the woods. This is the Road of Trials portion of the story. It's like the training montage. He is tasked with keeping a sacred pond clean. Okay. There's 3 events across 3 days that he fails. So to answer your question about what is the problem with men, or what do we see as our self-sabotage, or where we get derailed, these are the 3 things in a nutshell. Number 1, on the first day, the prince has a wound, and he suffered the wound when he let the wild man out of the cage. Okay. And this is what happens when we leave our mother and we go to our father's house, we receive a wound. This is why in initiation, you get a scar, you get your tooth knocked out, something happens, right? That's your wound. And so the prince, his wound was on the finger, and it hurt so bad he dips it in the water, and strike 1. Iron John comes back and said, hey, let that one slide. Don't do it again. Day 2, he has healed his wounds and his trauma enough that he is absolutely not going to put that shit in the water again. And what happens is he's so focused on his wound that a bunch of leaves fall down into the sacred pond. He's like, ah. So Iron John comes back, says, strike two, last chance, kid. And then on the last day, the prince has healed his trauma. He has developed the discipline and the practices so that he is vigilant about maintaining his life. And he's so focused on that. He's got his life dialed in that he catches his reflection in the water, his glimpse of himself. And he's like, look at me go. And as he's looking at himself, his bangs fall into the water. And the moment his bangs drop into the water, his whole hair turns to gold. And it's the moment that the spirit has entered him, or the inspiration. Iron John comes back and said, oh, kid, I knew it was going to happen, but strike three, I love you, but now you got to go out and you have to learn the meaning of suffering. And this is, the Greeks call it katabasis, which is the descent into ashes, the ordeal, the abyss, the dark night of the soul. And this is where Carl Jung says, you send your roots to hell. And at that point, he has some other adventures where he eventually ends up claiming his kingdom, which would probably be another podcast. Yeah. But those are the three issues. We are all traumatized. We haven't healed our wounds, so we're bleeding all over everything. Number two, we are undisciplined, and we don't have enough practices to maintain a robust life. And number three, we have not yet returned to Gondor. We're not serving. So we think it's all about us.
Fascinating.
Men, take notes, men.
Yeah, no, they're taking notes. I'm taking notes for sure. I think this is pretty profound. Although I'm sure it repeats itself, through time. In many ways, we just keep living the same journey as men, just as they were 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, I'm sure, in many regards. And then other areas were, of course, evolving. But how are you incorporating some of these things into, tell the listeners a little bit more about all the programs you offer and the workshops and the rites of passage. I'm curious, since we're kind of chatting about it.
Well, I'm repping, for all you guys who are listening, you can't see, I'm repping all my K4 swag today because I'm part of a big men's group called King of the Four Houses. And we run a 13-week intensive program online about masculine studies. We do a deep dive into Iron John. We do a deep dive into the hero's journey and how the archetypes of masculinity are embedded in the hero's journey, and how they are the foundational anchors to the psychology of men. And that those four archetypes are the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover. And interestingly enough, there's a moment in Iron John where he's finally ready to go claim his kingdom. And he goes out to the stables to go off to war, to follow the men. And they have left him a shitty three-legged horse. And he knows he's never getting to the battle. He's never claiming glory, and he's not getting his kingdom. So this three-legged horse is a metaphor for we are all somewhat functional in three of the four archetypes. And there's one that is our blind side, or our Achilles heel.
Interesting.
And until you get that four-legged horse, none of us are claiming our kingdom. And so K4 is king of the four houses.
Beautiful. And is it pretty common that there's one of the four archetypes that men are not proficient in, or is it like all over the board?
There is always one that people are comfortable with, and it is the behavior in which we have spent the most time. And this is a combination of nature and nurture. So all of us men are born with a certain amount of desire for peace or power, competence or compassion. So where we fall on those two continuums places us in one of four different quadrants. And this is shared by every single culture. This is one of these core ancestral universal things. And interestingly enough, those four behaviors are also expressed by wolves. And wolves have four different roles of behavior, and they operate along the same two axes of psychology. And the reason why humans and wolves both do this is that collective versatility within a tribe drives adaptability. And adaptability is the inarguable superpower of communal pack hunting species like ours. Evolution is not survival of the fittest. Right. Evolution is survival of the most adaptable. So men, this speaks directly to the way that we are processing COVID, social, isolation, environmental change, economic change, aging gracefully, integrating all this new wisdom from all these great podcasts. Like, how quickly can you do it? You win. And if you're stuck in the inability to change, and if you ever say that's just the way I am, or that's just the way we do things, you have failed. And it's an evolve or die situation. So we are no longer physically evolving in time to answer the call. We're culturally, socially, spiritually, consciously evolving.
So it's the adaptability or the resourcefulness of men, of wolves, of human beings that sets us apart. If I hear 100%. You correctly. Yeah.
Yep. Now, wolves primarily have done that through the different behavior sets, just like a football team. Like you've got people who run the ball, people who throw the ball, people who block the ball, people who kick the ball.
Yeah.
And no one does all those things. Right. Now, they're all football players, and they should all be able to hit and wear pads and run. And just same thing with wolves. You're still a wolf. You still bite shit and you run.
Yeah.
Same thing with humans. We can all bite shit and run. However, there's certain things that we're really good at. Some of us are compassionate. Some of us are disciplined. Some of us are, competitive or whatever we are. And if you're part of a team, a family, a community, an organization that is able to utilize those specialists at the proper time in the proper scenario, you win. And that's how all organizations that are successful function. And that's kind of the work I do with corporate teams as I reintroduce that kinship system into the corporate world.
Well, and I was reading too on your website or wherever, just that about that kind of connection and alliance with the wolf from 35,000 years ago, I believe is what you said. Yep. You're talking about a lot of parallels, but how are you using, that, I don't know, kinship or that alliance, and bringing it into modern day time as being a teacher, if you will?
Yeah. Well, they were the teacher. In fact, all the Native American cultures refer to the wolf as the teacher. That's how they refer to that animal. And what's interesting is that since our, this is a Homo sapien, this is us, anatomically modern human, and very unsuccessful. Like, we're not the lords of creation. We are a low-level scavenger who has very little technology and almost went extinct. There was a genetic bottleneck several times over the last ice age where we were down to under 5,000 members of our species on planet Earth.
Wow.
Like we were at the verge of going out.
Seriously.
Yeah. Multiple times. So when you compare that to the wolf, like a wolf pack at full power is the most dominant organization on planet Earth, on the land. And ironically, on the water, what is it? In the ocean, who's the boss?
Orca whales, right?
Also known as?
Killer whales.
Also known as?
Mammals. I don't know.
Cetaceans.
Yeah.
Sea wolf.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Sea wolf.
Isn't that interesting? Like, that's a sea wolf. And so in the sea, it's the sea wolf. On land, it's the wolf.
That's so cool. Yeah.
And they had the widest range of any mammal, and they have the most success of any mammal, and they had the most adaptability of any mammal. There are orcas that specifically teach their young how to hunt sharks, and there's ones that specifically teach them how to hunt whales in specific situations. And then some hunt fish, and some hunt sea lions, and some hunt all these different things. Same thing with wolves. There are wolves that hunt fish. There are wolves that, hunt caribou. There are wolves that, it's the same animal, but a vastly different platform of adaptability.
Crazy.
So we basically, as our unsuccessful marginal species, we have neuroplasticity, and we basically hacked and stole their operating system, and that's what we see today.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, and you I was reading too that there's 3 lessons of wolf wisdom. I'm kind of curious to know if maybe you've mentioned some of those already, but what are those?
Say the first part again. The
What's the 3 lessons of wolf wisdom?
Oh, okay. Well, there's the paleoanthropology version of this, and I'll very quickly, the what is the oldest form or expression of culture that you can think of when you look at humans? In the
oldest form?
like evidence of culture.
You mean by like Native Americans or
even older? Let's go back to our hominid, our family tree. Where do you see
evidence?
Culture for sure? Yeah, what's the evidence of it? It's a tricky question.
Forms of fire, maybe?
Yeah,
or
yeah,
pottery.
or
tools.
Is it tools? Yeah. Or is it cave art? Is it ritual burial? Where is culture?
Yeah.
And this was asked to the famous anthropologist Margaret Mead, and she said, healed long bones. Because a broken leg in the wild is a death sentence.
For sure, right.
And I remember the first time I went to Africa, we were riding along with safari jeeps, and there's a zebra that didn't run from us. We were driving along to it. And it couldn't run because it had a big compound fracture in one of its front legs. And it was like, oh God, it's terrible. And I said, does the veterinarian come out? Or how does that work? And they looked at me like, no, mister, he gets eaten tonight. I was like, oh, that would make sense. It's Africa.
Right.
So you get eaten, right? If you have a broken leg, unless what?
Unless it heals.
Well, what needs to happen before it to heal?
I think you need to reset it and rest. Yes.
Yeah. How do you feed yourself? How do you get water? How do you get not eaten?
You got to protect yourself, right? Yeah.
Well,
and sustain yourself. You have to have systems to.
Do you have to sustain yourself with your broken leg?
No, you'd have support, right, of your brothers. Yeah.
Culture. Ding ding. So very few animals have evidence of regularly healed long bones in the fossil records, but wolves and hominids, which is our lineage, do.
That's so cool.
So there's some reason, and everything has a reason. Nothing is random. There's a massive intelligence underneath the hood. So why would you be willing to invest all that time and energy and risk bringing food and water and not being able to run and having to stay to keep that one wounded member alive? Why do we do it?
I'd say love.
You're going all the way to love?
I mean, why else would you do it?
Why do wolves do it?
I don't know. Maybe is it part of that pack mentality where there's
what's the benefit?
The benefit of supporting each other. I don't know. Maybe it's just that bond for survival.
Why do almost every successful and certainly contemporary military, you leave no man behind? Why? What's the point of that? It'd be much easier to let him go.
Yeah.
Saving Private Ryan. Why do we do that? Why?
That's a good question. I don't know if I know the answer to that. Maybe just so that you're willing to risk more. I don't know.
There's a number of things, but what we're talking about is altruism. Altruism is a selflessness that you don't necessarily have to do, but you do. And you see it only in, you see it in cetaceans, which are whales, real smart animals. communal animals.
Right.
So it turns out that the individual is worth investing in. There is a multi-generational investment in these individuals. It's
Yep.
not just a thing. And that also increases this trust and safety, which drives reciprocity.
Hmm.
So I know that if I will bring you water when you're sick, then you're going to bring me water when we're sick. So there's this collective
It's gonna take that. Yep.
resiliency that happens,
Mm-hmm.
and people will then start taking more risks instead of it just being all for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So we start to drive an honor-based culture.
Mm.
An honor culture is that core operating system that exists in indigenous tribes across the globe.
Mm.
And it still exists in military units, jujitsu schools, uh, professional sports teams,
Mm-hmm.
but we've lost the honor system because um, it can't exist in gigantic organizations
Mm-hmm.
because it involves knowing people at an intimate level.
Mm.
Like, I'm not going to sacrifice myself for you if you're a stranger. I will sacrifice myself for you if you're a kinsman. Like, if I know who you are
Mm-hmm.
and you're an extension of myself,
Mm-hmm.
like if you and I were brothers, then it's like, yeah, you want a kidney? You got it.
Yeah.
Like, you fuck with my brother, you fuck with me.
Right.
I mean, that's how it works.
Right.
But if you're just a stranger on the street, hey, bro, not worth me getting involved with that. That's
Yeah.
your circus, your monkeys.
Yeah.
So we have experienced the destruction of our honor-based code,
Mm.
and we have been replaced by a pride-based system, which is focused on an individual-centric reality.
Mm.
Now it's every wolf for himself.
Mm.
And what that leads is the inability to hunt big game.
Mm.
And wolves and humans are built to hunt big game.
Mm.
So we have then reverted to hunting small game or scavenging.
Mm.
And that's what most men end up doing with their half-ass careers and their, addiction to porn and alcohol and lone wolf status.
Mm-hmm.
It's a death spiral.
It's settling for less than
Mm-hmm.
we're capable of. Yeah, completely agree. So go back and list the three
Oh, sorry. That's where we
wolf
were.
wisdoms. That's
Good
where
job.
we're
Hey,
going.
good interviewing. You brought it back. Nice work.
Yes,
Okay.
I'm curious because
Okay.
I'm really curious.
So
Yeah.
wolves and
Altruism.
humans share altruism.
Yep.
Healed long bones. The second one is that what I mentioned, driven by altruism, is that ability to have multi-generational learning.
Mm.
If you look at our species has been around for 300,000 years. Our tool use has been around for 3 million years. And basically, same tool it's called an Acheulean hand axe, really simple, bi-faced, flint napped thing, quite beautiful.
Yeah.
But we didn't invent that. Like Homo erectus 3 million years ago invented that. Now, you and I, you drop us off in the Serengeti, we're not making that thing. In fact, we die pretty quick.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless our great grandfather had taught our grandfather, who taught our father, who taught us.
Mm-hmm.
So multi-generational learning, that elder wisdom that is passed on, is the thing that we share with wolves as well. That's the second commonality.
Mm.
And it's kind of what I'm doing with my wolf tribe work, and really with K4, is I've spent a lot of years gathering elder wisdom, and I'm reinstalling it. I'm making it available for men and organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last thing that we share with the wolf are what I talked about before, are those 4 different behavioral roles that exist within a pack or a tribe that drive versatility and therefore adaptability.
Mm-hmm.
So we share all those 3 things, and how that happened, obviously has been lost in the mists of time. But we do know that 70,000 years ago, we came out of Africa up into Europe, and it was already populated by the Neanderthal and the wolf. And they were having their fixed battle, just like the hyenas and the wolves did down
Mm-hmm.
in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And the Neanderthals were something you did not want to fuck with.
Mm.
They were radically bigger, stronger, faster, better adapted to cold climate, and bigger brains,
Mm.
and the same toolkit. And they already had all the good caves. So good luck, humans,
Mm-hmm.
in colonizing that. But what happened was we formed that alliance. So 35,000 years ago, we formed, that our first and most transformational partner with the wolf, and it was it, and the world was never the same because we then took that animal and that partnership across Asia, across the land bridge into North America,
Mm.
tromped down through Central and South America, hunted the shit out of planet Earth.
Mm.
In fact, everywhere that the wolf and the man combo went, you see an 85% drop in megafauna. So
Wow.
we wiped out all those big, slow things because there was nothing else like us at that
Mm.
point.
So when you say, I'm just thinking about this practically, when you say like we formed an alliance with the wolf 35,000 years ago, it not like an alliance that I'm initially thinking of, but it's more like we're watching what they're doing, what's working for them. We're applying the same strategies, and like, but coexisting as they kind of work from continent to continent. Yes.
You know what? Again, a lot of people have seen the movie Alpha.
Yeah.
Um, that wasn't my version of that.
Mm.
I do know that with at least in Native American, North American culture, they there was a communal hunting dynamic in place
Mm.
that the humans with their tools were much more lethal
Mm-hmm.
than having to go in with your face on a bison.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, it's
It's
a
hugely
wolf,
risky.
a big wolf is 100 pounds, a big wolf, right? And a bison weighs 2,000.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a bloodbath. So, number one, all you guys who think that the lone wolf thing is cool, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really bleak way to go through life,
Mm-hmm.
and you're a scavenger.
Mm-hmm.
So shift your process of
Mm-hmm.
um, you're not free because you're a lone wolf.
Yeah.
You know, riding across the desert on your Harley, you're starving to death.
Yeah.
So wolves are faster. They obviously have way better senses than we do. They're
Mm-hmm.
better hunters. We're better killers. And there's a profound difference between hunting and killing.
Mm-hmm.
Hunting means broad aperture
Mm-hmm.
of look what's in the valley and how do I move towards that. Killing is a narrow aperture and it is being incredibly focused.
Totally.
And humans are killers.
Mm.
Wolves are hunters. I
Mm.
mean that was the specialization that happened, and the Native Americans would always leave a leg for the wolves. It was an agreement.
Mm.
And what's interesting, there seems to be evidence of wolves and ravens partnering. Is that ravens were almost the Air Force, and
Mm-hmm.
wolves will leave food for ravens.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of different
That's so
kind
cool.
of synergistic alliances
Yeah.
in the animal world, and humans and wolves were absolutely one of them.
That's so fascinating. I love it. And I still geek out and on watching, especially on like Instagram or on TV, just the documentaries on wolves or wild dogs over in Africa, how they show, especially like from a drone, as they're watching them spread out, hunt caribou, and just how they exhaust them, how they go about. Oh, it's just fascinating. I'm like, yeah, so cool. I love it. Well,
And
it's
what's
good
interesting,
stuff.
and this was when I was in school, that we weren't talking about any of these things, but um, we the whites of our eyes is called the sclera, the
Mm-hmm.
white of your eye,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a tremendous liability at night if you're trying to hunt something because you can be seen right with the
Mm-hmm.
whites of your eyes, or
Mm-hmm.
if you're being hunted, another terrible liability.
Mm.
And if you look at most big cats and all the primates, none of them have white sclera.
Oh, interesting.
So uh, wolves have white sclera.
Hmm.
And the reason why they do is because it's an incredibly powerful nonverbal communication of, look what I'm looking at. Look exactly, you can tell exactly what I'm looking at by just seeing my eyes move.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I just have to go like that. And you're going, oh, right there, that one, that
Mm-hmm.
one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we're the first primate that has white sclera.
Hmm.
And there are many people who are saying that is like, the wolf became our dogs.
Yeah.
Well, we changed a little too. So this was a little combo platter of us being able to partner together. And I don't really need to even tell my dog much verbally.
Mm-hmm.
My dog just kind of see where my language, my body posture, and what I'm looking at. And
Mm-hmm.
they know exactly what we're doing.
Mm. Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it. When we talked offline, you kind of talked about I mean, you've talked a little bit about it just while we've been recording now, but just that vital need for the return of authentic kinship, to our culture and our world right now, especially
Mm-hmm.
right now. Explain kind of what your thoughts are a little bit more on that, especially for men and men doing men's work with each other.
It's we would never hit the bottom of how important kinship is.
Yeah.
And I'll riff on a couple vital things. Number
Yeah.
one, uh, there's a big difference between guilt and shame.
Mm.
Guilt is what you feel about yourself, and you can self-absolve. It's like, you know what, I kind of half-assed my workout, but you know what, I'll get back after it tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Cool, no
Mm-hmm.
harm, no foul.
Mm-hmm.
Shame is very different because it's what I think you think about me. And if I know that we're both training for something that we need each other,
Yeah.
and I half-assed my workout, and I know you saw, I'm ashamed.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way that I can dispel that shame is by saying, hey bro, uh, I did lean into that last workout. And you go, hey man, totally cool, we'll get it tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
I've done the same thing. You're
Mm-hmm.
all good. And now I'm absolved. Oh, thank you. So I'm still part of you, like we're still good. I still have honor in your eyes. Now, without kinship, without the safety of being able to share that inadequacy, men get to carry their shame forever.
Mm.
And it gets heavier and heavier because each day you're inadequate,
Yep.
you get more shame.
Yep.
So eventually, there's just this gigantic toxic load of shame that is completely unhealthy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that kinship, that's the first one. The second one is we're all lazy. I mean, that's the reality. We all systems tend towards entropy. Like
Right.
no matter what we build, it's falling down at some point in time. So all of our practices and our rituals and our commitments, well, unless you maintain those, they're all degrading back to couch potato.
Mm-hmm.
And and
So
so
true.
part of kinship is having dudes that hold you accountable because you're
Mm-hmm.
going to be a fucking loser if you just lean on your own motivation.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually that burns out and you have a bad day, you fall off the wagon, and
Mm-hmm.
then it's like, oh, well, shit, am I back here again?
Mm-hmm.
So being part of a tribe of men that hold you accountable for something larger than yourself
Yeah.
is indispensable.
Mm.
Um, from a simple biochemical level, the kinship drives resiliency. It releases serotonin, particularly physical contact. So when I am with my brothers, my kin, then my body is releasing serotonin because it's a well-being hormone, and what it does is it cancels out cortisol. It
Mm.
turns off your sympathetic nervous system.
Mm.
And so if you don't have enough serotonin, that's clinically called depression.
Mm.
Okay. So
Yep.
without your brothers, like you get to live like that.
Yeah.
And I could go on and on and on about kinship. I
Yep.
mean, it's because it is the core operating system of our species. We're designed for it. It's kind of like, okay, we've spent 100 years building cars. And now, you know what? We just decided it's better to just pour water in the gas tank,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it's healthier. It's way better.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're fucked. Like, good
Mm-hmm.
luck. You have to completely overhaul the whole car. So, unless you're going to completely overhaul humanity at a cellular level, you need kinship.
Mm-hmm. And I would say, especially with some of my friends, free men's meetings, that I would say it's so many of them come away with they didn't realize that other men felt the same way that they did. It's the realization that they're not a lone wolf, and B, just how much they're hungry for kinship, just
Yep.
guys being guys together, in all those different facets. Well, I love it. And talking about doing the work, kinship, wolf tribe. Tell the listeners a little bit more of what you got going on with the K4. I mean, you mentioned the K4 rite of passage, but the digital program, is it digital? Is it live? Is it hybrid? What does that look like?
So the website for you guys who can't see, it's K4, like the letter K, number 4, men.com. K4men.com, really easy to remember. And it was originally designed, my co-founder, Joshua Wenner, he's another veteran, and he's a real leader in the grief and trauma space. So this is that's one of his spheres of genius is that.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of a big leadership guy, and he's a resiliency guy, and K4 is a leadership and resiliency company. And to get into K4, you have to go through the rite of passage that we've all gone through, where you get introduced to some of these central things so that we're all aligned and we're safe. Like that's, and men have been doing this forever. Even in the Masons, to get into the Masons, you have to go through this process where you are now in alignment, you're bought in, and you have to behave in an honorable way. Otherwise, you don't get to be in the Masons anymore, or the Marines, or whatever other fraternal order there is. So this is our version of that. And so the rite of passage consists of 13 weeks of really, really great digital content and curriculum. And then every week you meet with an in-person, or it's remote, right? But it's live. Small accountability groups where you unpack it, you do your challenges together, and you go through the cohort with a small group of men, and that's called a round table. And after going through the rite of passage, then you get to join K4 Nation, which is our ongoing men's group. And next week, we're going to go out and see the wolves. We go rock climbing.
Cool.
We have a big retreat in October where a couple hundred of us are going to go up to Big Bear and get in the woods and do man shit.
Yeah. So out on the West Coast.
Correct. Yep.
It's incredible. So if guys wanted to get into kind of just learn more, k4men.com, they can sign up there and then just kind of roll from there, right?
And I guess the other one, just you're asking my and that's my labor of love, K4. How I buy food for my family is I'm an organizational consultant. So I do leadership and culture development with organizations, with teams of people. I work at Red Bull and with sports teams and with corporations. And secretly, what I'm doing with them is I'm reinstalling kinship into our corporate world. And if you are a leader who is interested in that, then I'd love to chat with you about that journey.
Yeah. So that's the Wolf Tribe Organizational Consulting Services, if you will.
And the website is mywolftribe.com.
That's awesome. And you've worked with Google, Apple, SpaceX, Red Bull, tons of amazing companies like that. That's so cool. You're killing it. I love it. You've got so many things. I've been on your website multiple times, and you've got so many things that you've been just investing your heart and soul into. It's pretty cool to see just where you've come in terms of the work that you've been for decades. It's got to be somewhat gratifying.
Absolutely. It's been a really exciting process, and talking about those 3 stages of keeping the sacred pond clean, and also as it relates to getting older, you start getting some clarity about those things. And that certainly has been my path, is healing the trauma, doing the bucket work, which is a word that comes from that book Iron John. It means to bucket out the lake to get to the wild man. And you start establishing the discipline, protocol, practices that create a sacred life. Learning how to sacrifice for the sacred. And once those pieces are handled, then you get to start taking some shots downfield at service and purpose and meaning and legacy and some of those other things. And so the place that I'm at right now is, it's not fair to compare, like when young men go on, oh, this is what I should be doing. It's like, no, you do your work right in front of you.
Yeah.
Like do that. Campbell says, when the knights went on the quest, they all entered the woods at their own darkest point. If you follow the path of another knight, it is not your path, and you will never achieve your full potential. And what he's referring to is, you have to go on your journey, and wherever it is, it's going to suck. And for a long time, it's going to suck. And you start finding the glory in the suck, and you start finding the transformation. And at some point, all of that shadow and that darkness actually becomes your brand, and it becomes your passion. It becomes your vehicle. And instead of fighting the dragons, you start riding the dragons. It becomes your most powerful piece.
That really resonates for me. I feel like since my divorce at 30 and so many other things, it's just when the shit hit the fan, I feel like there's been so many amazing things over the last 11 years that I've been enjoying and I'm embracing, and yet there's so much of it that has been sucking, and it can get exhausting, but I think with other men, it's just being on a sports team. It just makes like we can all kind of not suffer together per se, but realizing that there's strength, there's bonding that comes together while we're doing the work together, so I think that to me really resonates. I'm glad you mentioned that. So there's so many more things I could talk about. I'd love to, this could be part
we'll do
one.
it again anytime. Anytime, Johnny,
because I want to hear about it, and I admire the relationship you have with your wife, just like personal side of things, of so many areas of where you've kind of dialed in your king energy and you're finding abundance, when I'm sure in your younger years it wasn't always the case. But there's so many things that we could talk about. But anyways, thank you from the bottom of my heart for the time, for the wisdom, for your energy, and I hope guys really do tune into k4men.com, all the other things that you have going on, especially if you're out in California. They can, what part of California are you in exactly?
I live in Venice Beach, where LA hits the ocean.
Yeah. Oh, incredible. Well, I'm definitely going to hit you up for a coffee or whatnot next time I'm out there, since I've got a bunch of friends.
I love it. And we'll go take a jiu-jitsu class.
I would love that.
We'll roll around.
I'd get my ass kicked. Yeah.
That's why you go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'd be happy to do that. But thank you, brother. I really appreciate it.
My man. Godspeed.
Thank you so much. And if you're listening for the very first time, thank you for checking out the Johnny King Show, and check out all the good stuff that Philip Folsom is up to. And we'll catch up with you on the next episode. All right. Take care.